Happy 4th of July and welcome to News Desk on SiliconANGLE TV. I'm Kristen Folletti. Do smartphone users have a specific value? And will future phones offer data security? Join us now to comment on the latest smartphone news is SiliconANGLE Senior Managing Editor, Kristen Nicole. Good morning, Kristen. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, happy 4th.
Last weekend, Blackberry announced that it had 72 million subscribers, with each account claiming a net value of $40 per account. So Kristen, if you could put these figures into perspective for us, is this good, bad? What does it all mean?
So looking at some further analysis from Ace & Co., what this means is BlackBerry's actually seen a drop in the value of their customer since 2010. So around 2010, the value was estimated at around $866 and has since dropped to approximately $40 per user. So that's a pretty significant drop in a relatively short amount of time. Not entirely surprising looking at all the things that BlackBerry's been through and the many obstacles they've faced in the smartphone market.
An article commenting on the latest data identifies several patterns and implies the notion that the U.S. is a smartphone market crucible. So can you explain that idea?
Sure. So looking at these numbers for the BlackBerry's prevalence in the U.S. market as well as the global market, it looks like things peaked for BlackBerry in the United States about 2 years before they peaked globally. So that indicates that the U.S. is an indicator of how smartphones are going to perform around the world. And this also just supports the idea that the U.S. smartphone market is indeed a leading smartphone market.
ComScore survey data also reveals similarities between the BlackBerry and Apple ecosystems. So what's the relationship there?
So that's one of the more interesting aspects of this particular report and analysis is that if we're looking at how the value in smartphone users broken down individually has changed for BlackBerry, can we ascertain that the same situation could come about for Apple? So really what we're seeing is the same patterns that BlackBerry had in the US and globally in the past 3 years are starting to happen for Apple as well. So their numbers are starting to decrease as far as value per user within the Apple ecosystem. And also these peak patterns are following similar patterns for Apple as we saw with BlackBerry.
So in the case of BlackBerry, the drop in value per user foreshadowed the drop in the user base that we saw in BlackBerry. Does that then indicate that the drop in value per user for Apple is foretelling of a reduction of Apple users?
That's certainly one indication here. And it's interesting, you can't really compare these two apple to apple, primarily because they have two very different ecosystems. When the iPhone hit the market, that's kind of what started the demise for BlackBerry. And also looking at the patterns for BlackBerry, what's also being hinted at here is that there was no inherent value in the BlackBerry user outside of that device. That's not necessarily the case for Apple. They have an ecosystem that's bigger than just the iPhone. They have other devices in their lineup. They also have other services that interact directly with consumers. So this is really an opportunity for the Apple ecosystem to kind of shine and prove its value from within, starting at the core of those services, building out to devices from there. At least that's my personal takeaway, especially as consumer services through mobile devices become more and more prevalent in our economy.
Mm-hmm. In other smartphone news, during this year's D11, Motorola executive Dennis Woodside discussed the manufacturer's upcoming flagship device, the Moto X, a smartphone which will be equipped with an array of sensors that will provoke the phone to act differently depending on various contextual factors. Now, following the NSA Edward Snowden scandal, Motorola is now owned by Google and has released a new ad for the Moto X with the notion that the phone can set consumers free. So, Kristen, do you think this message is saying something more, or is this just a cleverly targeted piece of marketing?
It looks like a pretty cleverly targeted piece of marketing to me. I don't think this is anything that is directly associated with some of the more scandalous implications that have come out recently. But I do think that it's important and a good thing that consumers are being a little bit more skeptical about the products that they use, especially with some of these newer features. So, what's interesting about automation at the consumer level is the types of features we're seeing come through smartphones. So, Samsung and now Motorola, they are incorporating these features into their phones that anticipate more of what you'll need, what you want, and have more sensors included in their devices, so they know when you're looking at the device and when you're looking away, and they know when you're pulling the phone out of your back pocket. It inherently knows when it should go to sleep and when it needs to wake back up. So these different aspects of automation that are being layered onto consumer devices will certainly have some crossover and raise many, many questions as to how we are going to maintain a level of privacy, how all of this information is going to be secured, and how this information is going to be used for the research and development and the production of devices in the future.
Recent events certainly have privacy at the forefront of consumers' ideas and thoughts, but do you think that consumers are going to be more leery about the brain power or the potential spying power of their devices, and should they be?
I certainly think that consumers should be aware. It's a really interesting topic for me. When Facebook first came about, you could sense that the presence of the social network was going to change our social behavior at a very, very wide level. And so this happened in many regards. People on Facebook weren't necessarily thinking about the implications of the information they were sharing on the social network until it starts to come back up in legal proceedings. And how many times has Facebook been cited in divorce court papers? These are things that consumers aren't really thinking about, but certainly has lent itself to a different perspective on the way social behavior is expressed. And so I anticipate the same thing will happen with more sensors being added onto our devices and more automation being layered into these consumer devices. It's going to change our social behavior to a certain extent. But also, when consumers begin to get leery of these things and get tired of having to constantly watch their back and change their behavior in order to participate with technology, they'll start to pull away, or they'll start to look for services that maintain their sense of security. So I do think that rising awareness about these consumer products from the consumers themselves, as well as advocacy groups, will really bring about an economy that's centered around the security for the individual.
Kristen, do you see opportunity here for smartphone manufacturers in the future to offer untappable or perhaps data secure devices?
I do. I think that this is going to be a very good opportunity, and once manufacturers and other service providers are able to realize the business potential in providing some of these security services, we'll start to see a lot more in the marketplace.
Well, Kristen, thanks so much for your comments this morning, and have a great holiday.
Thank you. You too.
And coming up here on News Desk, Google says no to Congress's privacy policy demands. But next, SiliconANGLE contributing editor John Casaretto discusses a shocking court decision for perhaps a less than guilty party.